Hi, and welcome to the Invigor Medical Podcast, where we're going to walk with you on your journey toward optimal health, performance, and well-being. My name is Natalie.
And I'm Derek.
And we're going to be your hosts on this journey. In each episode, we share insights from top professionals in physical, mental, and emotional health. With that said, let's dive into today's podcast.
Today, we are thrilled to have Brad Pilon with us. He is a renowned author of Eat, Stop, Eat, and we're excited to dive deep into the world of intermittent fasting and the impact it has on our health. Brad, welcome to the Invigor Medical Podcast. We're so excited to have you here. Oh my gosh. I think Derek and I both agreed before we started recording how excited we were for this conversation. Yeah, totally geeking out. And I think, I feel like intermittent fasting is something that has gained a little bit more traction in recent years. And I know I was even seeing like advertisements on my social media feeds for like download this app for like how to know what intermittent fasting is great for you, which I knew was BS, but I downloaded it anyway because I was just curious, and it was so ridiculous. And I'm just
so it's basically just a timer, right? Like,
yeah, it's like it's time to start eating. I'm like, thank you, application that costs $5 a month. It was just it was, it was kind of cool because it showed you what was happening depending on what state how long you were fasting. Cool. But what I'm getting to with all of this is there's probably a lot of misinformation out there around fasting and intermittent fasting. And so where I would like to start is I would like for our listeners to know what gives you the right to speak to this topic? Why is this? What have you done, right? Because it's not just like you're some guy who's like read a couple research papers and thought he'd write a book, right?
So my history with intermittent fasting goes back into about 2005, 2006. Okay. So I had just left the supplement industry where I worked in research and development, designing supplements and the studies to support supplements. And I realized I kind of wanted to be on the other side of the table, the sort of the academic side. So I'd gone back to school. And my original plan was just to study leucine, which was an amino acid involved in muscle growth and protein synthesis, just the perfect meathead thing to study.
Right.
And I was going to start with all the bad things that happen when you don't eat, because coming from bodybuilding, right, I knew for certain that the minute you didn't eat, like we're talking like an hour and a half in, your body just implodes, right? You start losing muscle, you start gaining fat.
Your body eats itself.
Horrible.
It just like says muscles, nom, 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 right?
Exactly. So I started looking into the research on that, just what happens when you don't eat. And a lot of my assumptions, which was the quick muscle loss, et cetera, wasn't really being reflected in the research I was reading. So I did what any like really pompous grad student would do. And I took that research and threw it in the garbage because it was wrong. And I went to the next paper. And I'm like, this one's saying the same thing. Just garbage. And then after a while, I was like, okay, I either got to admit I have no idea what I'm talking about or just start over. What am I going to do? So I decided I got to figure out what's going on. So my grad work was on the metabolic effects of short-term fasting, so 12 to 72 hours in humans. And this was in the heyday of when the entire health and fitness industry was run by magazines. So not websites, because they weren't really there, but magazines, your Men's Health, your Muscle and Fitness, your Flex, your Oxygen, those kind of things. And they were the gatekeepers of health and specifically nutrition information. And so at that time, we were to eat every few hours, a small meal. That was
2 to 3 hours.
That was what we were being told. And if you didn't, your metabolism would crash and you'd gain weight and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So my research was really in response to that movement, the idea that we had to just constantly eat. And the idea was, are we really that fragile, or are we far more robust in our ability to handle brief periods of time without eating? And it turns out we are far more robust. And it turns out that these breaks in eating can have very good effects on our health. And probably most importantly for most people, result in fat loss as opposed to muscle loss. And that's what kind of led me on this path. I took my thesis. I asked my advisor, like, do I own this? Does the school own this? He's like, you own it. I'm like, can I publish it online? He's like, that'd be dumb, but you can do whatever you want. And that was Eat, Stop, Eat. It was originally a 72-page PDF that was my graduate thesis kind of explained a bit better. Wow. And then through the beauty of online grammar people telling me that, this was wrong or this made no sense or this chapter is horrible, it just slowly got better and better as I edited as I went. And now it's a 300-page book that's available almost anywhere, and is continuing to push the concept of intermittent fasting kind of into the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah, actually,
Quick story.
I started listening to it on Audible, and so
nice.
Yeah, it's really, really good so far, and super excited to dive into this. So I guess with that being said, one of the big things that you talked about in the book was this, and you already kind of touched on it to a certain degree, of like, people just have this misconception of if you don't eat, all these terrible things are going to happen. So can we kind of dive into that? And
yeah. And I would say specifically, because this is one of my questions, right? Because I think if you've spent kind of any time in the health and fitness world learning about how to eat and fuel your body, one of the things that we're taught is if you reduce your calories too much or don't eat at all, your body goes into starvation mode and begins to hold on to every single calorie that you eat.
Starvation mode.
Because it's like preparing for famine, right? And so this is one of the harder things that I struggled to grapple with, even like thinking about doing a 24-hour fast, or I'd hear people like, oh yeah, I just eat one meal a day, and I'm immediately like, that's where my brain goes. So could we start with that one?
Yeah. So obviously coming from that bodybuilding supplement world, that was my main concern too. So the very first thing we look at is something called a respiratory quotient, which is in research, we measure the amount of oxygen you breathe in and carbon dioxide you breathe out.
Okay.
From that measurement, we can get a very good idea of the mix of what you're using as a fuel, whether it's carbohydrates or whether it's fats. Sometimes a little bit of protein, but mostly we're looking at those two fuel sources. If your RQ, respiratory quotient, is a 1, you're burning exclusively carbohydrate.
Okay.
If it's a 7.7, exclusively fat. So we're usually somewhere in the middle, depending on the mix of what we've been eating.
Okay.
So when we're fasting, this is super easy, just a thing you put on your mouth and you breathe, right? Super easy measurement, super reliable, and just used all over human research, in animal research too. And what we find is that as you're fasting, your RQ goes down closer to that 0.7, which means we know in a very reproducible manner in men, in women, in lean, in the obese, and everything in between, during those initial 24 hours, your RQ goes from roughly the mix of what your last meal was, and then starts heading towards that 0.7 or almost exclusively fat being burnt as a fuel. Only you're not eating any fat. Right. So where's the fat coming from? It has to be your body. And so that kind of put to bed the idea from starvation mode that you somehow avoid burning fat and you burn other fuel sources. Because you're like, well, no, I've got a very clear measurement here that the fat is being burnt. But then you worry about, okay, what about my metabolism? Like maybe I'm not burning as much. And again, a very simple measurement to do, which again is just a mask over your face, not a difficult thing, not blood being taken, but just measuring what we consider a really good estimate of your metabolic rate. And we find that during a fast, it does go down a small amount. We're talking the same amount of calories in a half cup of coffee with a little bit of cream in it. Not a lot, 50, maybe 100. And what that is the calories you would normally be burning digesting food. So eating, assimilating those nutrients, et cetera, it takes energy. Everything in your body takes some amount of energy, creates some heat. And so you're not digesting or assimilating food. So the calorie intake is smaller. But that basal metabolic rate, the thing that keeps you alive, like you're sitting watching Netflix, your heart's beating, your liver's doing its work, your lungs are doing their work, that stays the same. And that does the lion's share of your calorie burning in any given day, right? It takes a lot to keep a human body going. And it's not you running up and down the stairs once or twice a day or once, twice an hour. It's the processes that kind of behind the scenes, right? All of your internal organs doing what they do best are what drive your metabolic rate. Now, long term, if you were to decide, I'm going to diet, I'm going to eat half the amount of calories I'm supposed to eat for the next 4 or 5 months, by the end of that, you're going to probably see a shift in your metabolic rate because your organs are now adapting. They may be a little bit smaller, a little bit less active. But in general, over for me, at the 12 to 72-hour period in my research, you don't see that. It's an acute period of not eating where your body's quick reaction is, all right, we'll burn a bit more fat, right? We got no food coming in. Luckily, we have these reserves. I'm just going to burn a bit of that and see what happens. And then in 24-ish hours, when you start eating again, your body's like, oh, well, that's done. Okay. all's cool. So that idea of starvation mode kicking in an hour or two is mostly myth. It really helped sell bodybuilding supplements and protein powders. Like, it was fantastic for that.
Right.
But in terms of being supported by research, it's not there. It is probably more of a long-term adaptation to true famine, starvation type situations.
What about if you're, if you're a person who's like, because I've talked to so many people who do this, they're like, yeah, well, I pretty much just don't eat until dinner, and then I just eat dinner. And that's like their life. And they're not even like intentionally doing intermittent fasting, but I'll bring it up as like, a way to eat healthy. And they're like, oh yeah, I only ever just eat dinner. And immediately I'm like, that can't be good, right? If that's all you're ever doing. But then you hear 24-hour fasting, like really good for your system. So like, can you speak to that? Like,
okay. So this is more, I'm going to hit like
kind of
personal
scheduling
bias
thing.
type
Yeah.
stuff. But
Yeah.
Eat Stop Eat was designed so that the fast was a pattern interrupt on your normal eating habits.
Gotcha.
So the fasting was the break. The way people are using it now, the eating is almost the break. You're fasting all the time, and then you're finally breaking your fast with a meal, then going back to fasting. So it's a very different approach philosophically, because what I liked was the way Eat Stop Eat was designed, which is a 24-hour fast once or twice a week.
Gotcha.
It allows for that pattern interrupt, for you to kind of stop, reflect on the last couple of days of eating, be like, I did well, I didn't do well, and then rest, reset, and move on. When you are simply fasting every single day for as long as you can until dinner, I think the approach, the thought process is different, where it's just, it could be just that you just like really, really big dinners, and this is the only way to make it work. And I get that. But I think a lot of people, it starts to almost become a fear of eating. And for me, Eat Stop Eat, intermittent fasting, the point is still to eat. The point is still enjoy your food and have the meals you like. It's not to be afraid of eating. It's just to take a break from it occasionally. So they're very different approaches. And the 1 meal a day approach may fit some people. They might be like, I don't like breakfast, I don't like lunch, but man, I love a big dinner. I'm like, well, it's hard to argue if you're kind of vibing with the way that you're eating.
Right.
But if you're more, I'm afraid of breakfast, I'm afraid of lunch because I don't want to get fat, but I guess I'll have dinner, that worries me a bit more.
Yeah. So I actually did a 1 meal a day fasting schedule for a long time. Like back in 2016, one of my buddies kind of introduced me to intermittent fasting as a concept. I'm like, this is really cool. Worked my way up to, work all through all the different schedules, the 16-8, 18-4. And then eventually I was like, okay, let me try 1 meal a day. And actually, like, I vibed with that on a very deep level for a lot of different reasons. And primarily, it just made it really simple, because it's like, if I'm at work, I'm not eating. And that was a really simple rule to just follow. Another really good thing that I enjoyed about it personally is that if I'm not, funneling my money towards breakfast and lunch, I have all these resources available that I can use to funnel towards the highest quality ingredients for really good meals for dinner. So like grass-fed beef. And this is back when, I'm like a starving college student. So I'm like, just trying to scrape by anyways. And so I'm like, okay, great. Now I don't have to worry about these 2 meals. And I can really just funnel all of this money and resources into getting the highest quality foods that I can buy. And like that worked for me for a really long time.
Did you find it was difficult to like get the amount of calories needed per day in that one meal? Because I'm just like sitting trying to imagine like doing that in an extended period of time and trying to get like 2,200 calories in a meal in a healthy way, like all the time, and feeling so full like every time. Like don't get me wrong, I could put away some food.
That feeling, right? That
I could put away some food.
I can put away food too.
Yeah. All right. Well.
But yeah, I mean, really, I think that the main reason why I stopped, and actually this leads to one of the big questions I wanted to ask you, is like I'm very much into like weightlifting and resistance training and that kind of a thing, and so I'm trying to like always optimize. But the main issue that I ran into is that I work out first thing in the morning, and my big meal of the day was dinner, and so talking about like the anabolic window. Obviously, it's not like super urgent that you get that protein in immediately. Obviously, sooner the better. But like, if I'm working out first thing in the morning and then I'm waiting all day to eat, that window of time I would assume would be missed. So I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think you're looking at scientifically significant versus real world relevant. So would there be a measurable difference if we got enough people to have the appropriate power for a study to look for this? Yes, you'd probably find something we'd be like, yeah, that's different. But real world over, a year of doing it that way, would you see a significant, measurable, noticeable in the mirror difference in muscle mass or strength? Probably not. And so that's where I find that sometimes we get caught up in the scientific significance versus the real world relevance. I think if your calorie intake and protein intake was appropriate and the training was hard enough, that stimulus is there. You have to adapt to that stimulus. The body's been received an input, right? And it's like, hey, based on what this crazy guy is doing to me every morning, I've got to adjust. And if it's like I'm going to have to adjust in the evening versus I'm going to have to adjust right now, that adjustment will still be made. So I think you would probably have seen relatively the same result. But if you are, let's say you're a competing Olympic lifter or a power lifter, where you're like, Brad, dude, like a half pound in my deadlift actually matters, then that's your priority. Then you're like, you know what? Screw this intermittent fasting stuff. If a half pound is the difference between me winning and me not winning, I'm eating right after my training. But if it's more like my family and I are going to South Beach in a couple of months and I want to look good, probably not going to make a difference.
Yeah. So one thing that I think that I would love to kind of segue into from here is, and something that I personally love about intermittent fasting is that it is incredibly flexible, right?
Yes.
Because there are so many different types of schedules. Like, and in fact, everybody does fast, right? To a degree. That's the reason why it's called breakfast, because you literally have to fast when you sleep, whether that's for 5 hours or 8 hours or 10 hours or however many hours you sleep. But everybody fasts. But to be able to push out that window to 12 or 16 or do a full 24-hour fast every couple of days or do one meal a day, like there's so many ways to do it, and yet it's so simple and can fit so many different lifestyles. So I don't know. What are your takes on all the different fasting schedules?
Oh, it's whatever fits into your lifestyle at this time. And what really gets me is when people are like, it's just not working anymore. And I'm like, well, why are you still doing it? Switch it up. So for Eat Stop Eat, great example. It's a 24-hour fast. If we started fasting today at 2, we'd fast till tomorrow at 2. Yeah. Easy, right? We sleep through the hardest part. We still eat every day. It's great. We do that for a couple of weeks. You're loving it. And then let's say a month and a half goes in, your schedule at work changes, and it's just not fitting. The answer, which I elude so many people, is try 5 p.m. to 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. to 7 p.m. or 11 a.m. Even just keeping with a 24-hour cycle, you have all sorts of different ways to see if you can make it fit again. Yeah. A lot of people who start getting really lean on Eat Stop Eat, they're like, yeah, I'm starting to find 2 24-hour fasts a day a bit burdensome. Like I get tired. I'm like, well, do 20. You're there, right? You already look fantastic. You don't have to fast for 24 hours. It was a super convenient way to do fasting, but let's call it 24-ish now. And on some days you hit 20 and you're like, that felt good, cut it. So I think the flexibility is the strongest part of intermittent fasting.
And the
close to the strongest part.
Yeah.
As long as you allow it to be flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also like the reason I like the 24-hour fast is that the positive reinforcement you get with it. So I like to say a diet for me is a slow, inevitable march to failure. At some point, I'm going to mess this thing up, right? It's going to be a wedding. It's going to be Valentine's Day, something like that. And it's done. I suck. I ruined it. I'm going to come back harder and stricter. Whereas with a 24-hour fast, if you're lucky enough to get it done, you're like, I did it. And it wasn't that hard. And I got to do it again in a couple of days, but I got some time. And yeah, I can do this, right? And so as long as whatever intermittent fasting you do, whether it's 16-8 or 24 hours, as long as it comes with that, like, nailed it kind of feel, then you're on the right path.
Yeah. Could we go over a little bit? Because this is, I actually not too long ago listened to a podcast where they were talking about intermittent fasting, and I learned something new on it. And this guest on the podcast went through the stages of fasting and like the 16-hour mark, the 18-hour mark, the 20, the 24, the 36, the 48, what was happening in the body. And I was like, dude, this is so cool. Because for me, part of what helps me stick with something is understanding the benefit. Like we just talked about on the episode we just dropped with Anthony Balduzzi, when I mentioned that I had been struggling to get into the gym. I'd been really out of my routine because I'd had some health issues and whatever. And it was just like the hardest it had ever been in years. And I made the one reason to go for my mental health. And because I'd started to really understand how it was impacting. So being able to keep that in my mind allowed me to have the wherewithal and the motivation to get back in the gym and stay in the gym. So
Right, okay.
similarly with fasting, because it's not uncommon or difficult for me to do a 16, maybe an 18.
Right.
Longer was getting more difficult, but when I heard the benefit and what was happening in my body, it allowed me to then be at the 24-hour mark or the 30 or the 36, because I did a couple of 48 hours spread apart.
Yep.
And in that moment, like, think, this is what it's doing for me.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then I was able to like push through. So would you take a minute to explain to our listeners what's happening in the body with the different stages of fasting?
Okay, so the hard part of this is it entirely depends on that last meal.
Okay.
And I'm gonna give you some really cool examples of new research that shows just how crazy that can be. But let's just go in general. Your last meal was under 1,000 calories. It wasn't all carb or all protein or all fat. It's just a meal, like food, right?
Yeah.
So
Just like a mix.
what you're gonna find is right after you're done that meal, there's carbohydrates and protein in that meal, so your insulin is gonna be high. And that's a good thing, right? We actually do want that peak after a meal. I know insulin is horrible to everyone and they're wearing their measurements, but in
demonized.
general,
Right.
you kind of want it peak and valley. Everything in human sort of physiology kind of peaks and valleys. Your insulin is high, and that is driving the absorption of the nutrients to the areas of your body that needs nutrients. Then at that time, exact same time, your growth hormone, which is really, really important hormone, not just for growth, unless you're listening to this and you're 15, in which case you're growing, but the rest of us, we're not
Right.
getting any taller. It's mostly a fat loss hormone.
Okay.
It's at like nadir levels, like really, really low. And then your inflammation after a meal is actually fairly high. And again, just like the inflammation after a workout, this is a good thing.
Okay.
Or inflammation when you get sick, a good thing. That first initial burst of inflammation. So you've got high inflammation, you've got high insulin, you've got low growth hormone. You actually, for a lot of the guys, depending on the size of that meal, your testosterone might be a bit lower as well. And your autophagy or your body's turnover, etc., we're not really in that phase. We're kind of at more of a sort out where these nutrients are going to go, then prepare to grow sort of phase.
Okay.
Then you're going to be looking, probably depending on the size of that meal, mostly in that sort of 6 to 12 hour range. It takes you a while to digest food. It's not as quick as some people think. The way humans are set up, we're not like a carnivore cat or something like that can completely digest something in 2.5 hours. It takes us longer. So that 6 hours is that digestion period. 6 to 12, you're starting to get into what we call postprandial. Your body's like, hey, now I got time to deal with all this stuff. So I'm repairing, I'm growing. Insulin is now starting to come down. Your body is now kind of going, okay, like we've got some calories, but not the full amount I need. So I'm gonna liberate a little bit from this body fat here and just kind of make up that difference. So we're going to be still using food calories, just kind of supplementing a little bit of extra stuff into there. Then by that 16-hour mark, now you're starting to see growth hormone. Your body's going, okay, not a lot of calories coming in. I don't know what the machine up there is, must be broken or something. So we need to liberate more fat from our fat stores. Insulin's already kind of going down because it's sitting there going like, food's gone. My job's done, guys. I'm kind of out of here. And growth hormone is now being released. And they're saying, because we got to get this fat out of the fat storage areas and into the blood. And that's what growth hormone really does. At that same time, we have some interesting enzymes that start getting really, really active. So you have HSL, which is hormone sensitive lipase. It's the one that releases fat. But you have its sort of twin, LPL, lipoprotein sensitive lipase. I'm getting mixed up. And it's like, I want the fat, bring it in. Mm-hmm. So as HSL starts getting active in your fat stores, LPL is going to start getting active in other areas like your muscles, especially if you're moving around, you've gone for a walk, you're doing dishes, you're doing something active. So not only is fat getting released now from your fat stores, there's areas of your body that are like, oh, okay, dibs. I call dibs on that. And it's starting to be shunted over that way.
So essentially, fat, like it's releasing fat out of your cells, and your muscles and other parts of your body are like, we need energy because the machine upstairs isn't eating food. And so it takes that and starts processing. That's so cool.
That's really cool.
Yes. At the same time now, your body's like, hey, the whole like food in's done, the inflammation thing, we don't need it anymore. So we're going from being pro-inflammatory to anti-inflammatory. So slowly but surely now your body's like, all right, well, we got time. Let's kind of start cleaning stuff up. Let's get anti-inflammatory. let's get autophagy going. Autophagy, which I don't know if you've ever heard some of my early podcasts. I called autophagy for the first year and a half. Yeah. So autophagy is the appropriate way to say it. And it's kind of like a look and see what's broken, and kind of like a Lego set. Break it up and rebuild it the way it's supposed to be built, right? So your 7-year-old built the Lego and you know they did it wrong. So they go to bed and you fix it. That's autophagy. It's your body going around looking for things that need a little fixing. And if it's not fixable, you just break the whole thing up and use it in other areas. So as autophagy starts to go up, inflammation starts to go down as you become more of an anti-inflammatory state. Growth hormone is now up. You're now burning fat. The protein in your muscles, assuming you're an active person, your body's looking around for energy. It's going to your muscles being like, can I use some of that? And your muscles like, no, dude, I need this. I'm using it. You can't have it, right? So as long as you've been active in the last, I want to say 72 hours, it's like those are spoken for. They can't be touched. So your body's like, fine, I'll go back to the fat and get more of that, right? So it forces you to grab more fat. And that's predominantly the role of GH. So if we were to make you fast but block your GH release, then your muscles would be like, yeah, fine, take the protein, I don't care, right? So GH is kind of that orchestrator getting those things going.
Okay.
And then by the end of that fast, now like your leptin levels, your ghrelin levels, all the hormones are kind of looking at you going like,
ghrelin is the hunger hormone, right?
Yeah.
The hunger hormone, that's the signal that's like, hey, it's time to eat. We're hungry.
Exactly. It's kind of looking at you now being like, okay, are we broken? Or are you just taking a break? So I'm gonna spike up a little bit higher. That has effects on a lot of the hormones that are like neurohormones in your brain. And then just when you're kind of peaking at around that 24-hour range, if you eat, you kind of just start this whole cycle over again. And if you don't eat, that's when you really start going into a system where that renewal, that rebuilding, that anti-inflammatory starts to spread into your immune system and other areas of your body, your macrophages. Okay, how do I explain this? Macrophages are white blood cells that are involved in your health and immunity. Macrophage, big eater. They can be inflammatory, and I think it's M1 state, or anti-inflammatory in M2. They really all start switching over to that anti-inflammatory state. So your immune system gets involved, and then the longer you start fasting, now ketosis, which is sort of using an alternative fuel source, happens. Those ketones start affecting your brain as well. And then we start getting into, outside of my expertise of short-term fast, and you start getting into that long-term fast where your body's going, okay, we're doing this for the long haul. Something's gone on, right? It's winter out. There's a famine. We're going to really start ramping up our ability to survive. And that's a whole host of other effects. But for me, it's that really getting that GH to peak, getting that insulin low, getting that anti-inflammatory effect, and a little bit of extra autophagy. And then you eat again. So that was sort of my process, the main things I'm most interested in.
Yeah. I love that. And it's so incredible, even in just that 24-hour period, what's happening in the body. And so it's kind of become, once I learned all of this, because again, it was like very natural for me to be at least 5 days a week doing a 16 or 18-hour window of no eating. And then once I learned this, I started trying to incorporate once a week a 24 to 36 hour. And kind of the thing for me was like, if I could get to 24, and then I kind of check in and be like, can we get to 36? Like, we got this?
Yeah, it depends on how you feel,
and
right?
I ended up getting to 48, relatively easily. And I tell you what, between 24 to 36, I felt invincible.
Yes.
I was like, whoo, let's go, world.
Yeah, the amount of focus,
it was crazy. And for somebody, I've had issues with my gut microbiome, so learning what fasting was contributing to my gut health.
Yeah, we didn't even touch on that.
Yeah. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Again, same thing. They're so dependent on not just the foods you eat. Like I'm always marveling at how much smarter you are than you are. So your brain, your gut, just so much smarter than you are, right? And they're constantly, we are incredibly adaptive and resilient. So your body's doing nothing all day long but reading inputs, and then reacting and adapting to make sure whatever those inputs are from your environment, you're like, okay, it can manage. So your gut bacteria are no different, right? They are competing for resources, and at the same time, they're trying to make sure you survive. So at times, they can shift to a bacterial population that we would consider not great for our health or our body weight. But at the time, given the environment, your body's like, yeah, I don't care, dude. You just ate 3 packs of fuzzy peaches. This is the gut bacteria you need, right? So it's like, I don't care what you think.
features
I
here,
want to
but-
keep this system thriving and surviving, and this is
Right.
the gut bacteria you need. So even though that gut bacteria, it's just sitting there going like, we're the bacteria that have to deal with nothing but artificial colors, sugar, and gelatin. So I guess that's what this body wants, and we're going to find a way to make it use that to the best of our ability, even if it means diabetes and obesity. It's just what we have to do with this system.
Right.
So a break, especially when you get a little bit past that 24-hour, gives your gut bacteria a chance to kind of settle back into what would be more appropriate is your kind of your base level. And then hopefully after that fast, you're like, hey, check this out. I'm gonna give you an apple, right? They're like, there we go. Like healthy food. We can work with this, right? So it allows I like to think of most of it as a reset, right? It's sort of your body resetting to almost a kind of a default mode that then you can rebuild on. So anyone who's had a major gut issue, right? So you went out for Thai food, you got the mango salad, and you're paying for it. Like you don't think, okay, I'm deathly ill right now, but what I really want is a muffin and a Snickers bar. You think I'm not eating again. Actually, you probably think I'm not eating again for the rest of my life. Like it hurts so bad, right? But you definitely don't think I'm going to snack. You think until this is done, it's nothing but water for me.
Right.
And then once you feel better, you start eating again. It's the same sort of process. You're just sort of letting your body do what it does. I like to say that you've known how to burn fat since the day you were born. You didn't have to read a book. You didn't have to do anything. Your body knows how to do it. You just have to get out of its way. And that's what we're really bad at is we're constantly in our body's own way by thinking what I should be doing is eating as much as possible all day long and not sleeping enough. So I'm eating when I should be sleeping too.
Oh man, so true.
But I find, I don't know if you found this, but you're invincible from 24 to 36 hours. And what I found was after about 40 hours, people they're not hungry. And they usually break the fast by about 72 hours because they're bored. Because eating takes up such a large part of our day. And then thinking about what you're going to eat, where you're going to eat it, who you're going to eat it with. These are massive parts of being human. When you remove that for a day, it's liberating, get a lot done. By about the third day, you're like, I am bored. Like I want to go out for coffee with somebody. Like it's just, So most people break their fast, not out of hunger, but out of boredom. They just want to eat again.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying today's podcast. I just wanted to take a quick break because if you're listening, you probably know what we do here at Invigor Medical Podcast, but maybe not what we do at invigormedical.com. So let me introduce us. At Invigor, we provide prescription strength treatments and peptides for weight loss, sexual health, and lifestyle optimization. Every treatment plan is carefully prescribed by licensed doctors and sourced from legitimate pharmacies. You don't ever need to buy questionable research chemicals again. And bonus, as a podcast listener, you get a 10% discount on your first treatment plan with code podcast10 at invigormedical.com. Now, let's get back to today's episode.
And I will say, like, if you've never done any kind of intermittent fasting, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not great to just jump right into 72 hours. It might be a little bit rough. Yeah. But I do want to touch, and sorry, Derek, I feel like I'm absolutely hogging the questions.
You're good.
But you mentioned depending on what you ate for your last meal. So this is a two-parter.
Okay.
Would you or do you recommend something specific or a sort of guideline for a last meal? And also for the first meal and breaking the fast, because I think this is a really cool topic and something to talk, because another like myth of nutrition is like breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? So people think like you have to eat in the morning, and it's very hard for people who have been taught that to break out of that and to think of an intermittent fasting sort of protocol. When what I learned was how you break your fast is what's important. It's not about the time of day that you eat it, but rather what you are eating to break the fast. Is that fact or fiction?
I think so. So I've got a couple of things on this. I'm going to take you through the pre-fast meal first, because this was an area I thought didn't matter at all. And then
this is first I'd heard of that, like being conscious of what your last meal is. When you mentioned that, I was like, really?
Yeah. So, okay. A study recently came out, and you've probably heard about it. They took a group of guys and they fed them 100 grams of protein.
Okay.
And this protein was radioactive. You feed dairy cattle radioactive food. It marks certain carbons or certain amino acids in their milk.
Okay.
Yeah. So what happens is it's not going to kill you, and you're not going to turn into an Incredible Hulk.
Right.
But they can track those amino acids through your body. right? So we know exactly where it's
So
going.
you can see. Okay.
And what they
that's
found was
wild.
after eating 100 grams of protein, these guys, and they were all younger guys, so just as a caveat, stayed in a anabolic protein building mode for about 12 hours. And the reason 12 hours is because that's when the study stopped. Now, most of our studies on this kind of stuff, we do 4 to 6. These guys were one of the first ones to be like, I'm going to see what happens if we go longer. So 12 hours. That's not the big surprise, because it just means that a ton of, 100 grams of protein, a ton of
Yeah,
protein
that's a lot of protein.
can stay in your system and can be used effectively for 12 hours. So it kind of got rid of the your body can only assimilate 40 grams of protein kind of talk, because it takes a long time to digest. But see, I saw that study a lot differently, because I know how it was designed. So if you were in that study, you would have had your last meal, the prepackaged meal I gave you, at around 8 the night before. I'd be like, okay, you got to eat this, then nothing else. Get to my lab by 8 a.m. the next day. I'm like, fine. So you'd eat your meal. It'd be like a prepackaged astronaut kind of frozen food kind of meal. You'd go to bed. You'd get up. You'd brush your teeth. You'd be like, I can't eat anything. You'd maybe have a black coffee. You get to my lab. I'd be like, awesome. You're here. I need to do a couple tests on you. I'm going to take your blood. And then we are going to set you up with some catheters. So I'm going to stick some lines into your veins. You're going to hate it, but you're going to get used to it. And then you're going to think, hey, what do I want to do? What should I do now? And I'm like, oh, you're going to sit in that chair and relax for 90 minutes while we measure your blood. And you'll probably think, can I use my phone? I'll say yes. And you'll sit on your phone for about 90 minutes. Interestingly, now you're about 14 hours fasted, right? You weren't allowed to eat. And I'm taking these measurements. Then you're probably like, all right, what's next? I'm like, this part's awesome. You're going to do an hour workout, full body. You're going to do 4 sets chest, 4 sets back, like 8 sets legs. And you're going to hate it, because I'm going to have, my grad students are going to be in there being like, you go, keep going, you can do it. And you're going to do a true 10 reps, like not the, oh, I think I'll stop here, but the like, oh my God, these kids are yelling at me. I'll do 2 more sets. And then 2 more reps, but then I'm done. Like I can't lift anything else. So it's going to be a harder workout than you expected. And then you're going to finish that workout and you're going to think, okay, what's going on now? And I say, oh, now we're going to biopsy you, which means I'm going to freeze a little spot in your leg. I'm going to open it up and I'm going to take a little chunk of that muscle out of your quad. You're not going to feel it, but the next day it's going to suck, right? Yeah. And I'm going to do that to you multiple times for the next 12 hours, which means by the end of this study, you've probably anywhere from 18 to 20 hours fasted, but you were anabolic the whole time because, right after that workout, you drank 100 grams of protein. So it makes me wonder, okay, they were measurably anabolic. And I was watching those amino acids, measuring them going into your muscles. So they weren't getting burnt as a fuel. You weren't peeing them out. They were being used. But you were fasting, which means if they were being used, you weren't using them as an energy source. So you were still using body fat, right? Because I didn't let you eat. You're sitting in the lab. So you didn't eat, but the protein you did eat back a while ago is being used to repair your muscles. So I thought that was super fascinating because it was the one part of that study. Everybody's like, look, see, you can use 100 grams of protein. And I'm sitting there going, you can be anabolic during a fast. That's weird. That's crazy. So that makes me think, as long as you're weight training, 100's a lot. We're not doing 100 unless you're crazy bodybuilder. But I think that meal before you fast should obviously contain a good whack of protein. It should be a meal, right? And again, I really want to get people back to the idea of thinking of food as food. So just a good meal. It doesn't have to be a protein shake. It doesn't have to be just a chicken breast. Like just have a meal that has protein in it.
Right.
Be full, then fast. Now we know, okay, like if you were worried about losing muscle during your fast, you definitely don't have to worry now. You ready, stop, eat. You're like, oh, look, Brad says you don't lose muscle, but I'm still not, I'm like 99% convinced. Well, here's your extra 1%. Eat some protein, and now you're good.
Yeah.
The meal after the fast, I struggle with because I get the idea of making it magical, but what I find for weight loss and compliance specifically, the very best thing that people do for me is when the fast is done, you pretend it never happened. So whatever you would have normally ate at that time is what I want you to eat. So it's a bagel with cream cheese. That's what you always have at 3 p.m. If I make you change off that, I risk weird things happening. So if I tell you it's cool you have a bagel and cream cheese, but then I also want you to have a giant protein shake.
Yeah.
But maybe that giant protein shake just does nothing but adds calories to your day, or makes you more hungry, or makes you concerned about what you're eating later.
Or messes
Whereas
with adherence.
just getting people to eat what they would normally eat at that time tends to be the trick to not only keep them compliant, such a bad word, but it's a word we use when we're talking about how people eat.
Yeah.
But I think it prevents them from overthinking and then overeating, thinking, I just fasted for 24 hours. I did something bad. I need to make up those calories. I should have a giant salad with chicken on it and some olive oil because I heard that's good for me. And then maybe a little bit of whole grain bread. You all of a sudden start overthinking, and then you start making up for the fast. Yeah. So as much as I like the idea of prescribing a post-fast meal of watermelon or something like that, generally telling people at that time, because some people break their fast right before dinner, some do it as a midday snack, some people are lunch, pretend the fast never happened. What would you normally eat? When people do that, the rest of that day they tend not to overeat. Whereas if I mess it up and end it away, all of a sudden they're trying to make up for the fast. So that's been my general take on it since like 2007 when we've kind of been doing this. I've tried other ways, but this seems to be the way to keep people from overeating as a response to the fast.
That's very cool.
I love it.
So I have a quick question. So we talked a little bit about what to eat before you start fasting, what to eat after, once you're done breaking your fast. A big question that I know a lot of people have is like, what breaks a fast? And also like, is there anything that you can do in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And, this is something that I think is really interesting because I don't remember which episode of Andrew Huberman.
Oh God, there it is.
It was. But he talked a lot about like really people think this idea of like breaking a fast, you consume any amount of calories and it's like, oh well, you might as well just break your fast. But it's like if you're in a caloric deficit and you consume something that, let's say you burn 100 calories going running and then you consume something that's 50 calories, you're still technically in a caloric deficit. So I don't know if that's something that you can touch on and kind of talk a little bit more about.
So this has been, again, since 2007. This was actually the, am I done school or am I going on to do my PhD on this? Because I was like, this was a fascinating question because we start with, we got to define breaking a fast. So for me, it was a significant fluctuation in GH. So we'd have to be at least about 14 hours into a fast to be able to make this measurable, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought, well then it would be the amount of calories, or do I now have to break it down to carbohydrates, fats, proteins? Is one of them unique? Then the problem became the inter-individuality of people, right? So what some people can handle, other people's can't. So I was like, I'm not doing this. This is really difficult.
It's huge.
So what we need is more of a guideline for people. And I like to think of it as the purpose of this is to fast, right? But I get it, right? So if you come to me and you're like, okay, level with me. How much cream can I put in my coffee? Because that's usually what it is, right? And I'm like, one, stop drinking crap coffee and you wouldn't need cream. But two, this is the amount you need to put in your coffee. If you can't go without, then don't. Because I would rather you have 30 calories of fat in your coffee and then be able to maintain your fast for another 8 or 9 hours than just simply never try fasting.
Yeah.
But if you can go without and you're just being a baby, go without.
Yeah.
Right? Because part of fasting is that. When I was doing, so like anybody, right? When I'm doing my grad work on fasting, I'm also trying out fasting because you're supposed to experiment on yourself. So I would be driving to class. And so I'm in Canada. And from where I live to my university is about an hour's drive. And like almost on the dot, every 10 minutes is a Tim Hortons. So a Canadian coffee shop.
I'm glad you clarified because I'm like, I don't know.
I assumed a coffee shop.
Then you got to travel because you got to get up here. And it's really interesting because 9 times out of 10, it doesn't taste like coffee at all, but you're still going to crave it. It's the weirdest thing.
Weird.
But I would be wanting to turn in no matter what, because I was stopping there usually for like late night class. So even though if I had a massive meal, let's say you guys came up and we had a big dinner out and I'm like, guys, I got to go. I've got lab. I would still be basically trying to pull into that drive-through. Or if I'm, let's say I was finishing up a workout, it was like, oh God, I got to school. I'm late. I'm already running late, and I'm still like, I want to pull into that drive-through. So what fasting made me really aware of, and what I think is one of the main benefits, is I'm not hungry, right? You know what I mean? Like I just ate, and I'm late, but I'm still wanting to pull into that bloody drive-through. Why? If you can use fasting, even if you decide, I didn't really like it, Brad, Eat Stop Eat was good, but not for me. But if in those fasts you learn, but what I do know is, man, do I have a problem at 3 p.m. wanting a donut? It's just like this habit I have to break. Then that fasting was a success for you. Yeah. It was a great thing.
You know, there's a Japanese word, I think, for that. I think it's kushisabi, which literally means mouth loneliness. There's another piece of useless information for you.
Yeah, once you're in a car and you're like, I'm used to driving and I drive automatic.
Chewing something.
With my coffee. Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't have an exact number that breaks the fast, but what I can remind everyone is that the point is to fast. The point is to feel what it's like to go without, to get out of your body's way and let it do what it does. So if you can go without, go without. But if you can't, if you absolutely can't, then don't. There's no hard rule. Now, I will say there has been certain fasting programs that came out long after Eat Stop Eat, but are based loosely on Eat Stop Eat, that were like, yeah, guys, you can have like 500-600 calories and still be fine. And I was thinking, that's a 6-inch sub from Subway.
Yeah.
It's not fine, right?
Yeah.
That's now you're intermittently dieting. You're not intermittently fasting.
Right.
And if you're allowed to, anytime you feel a little bit peckish, be like, oh, I guess I'll get a sub. And I don't think you're learning much.
Right.
So yeah, I'd like So the point is I don't have an answer for that, but I do have a theory that we are trying to fast and we're trying to learn to go without.
What, can I ask one more question, just as a tail to that? I've seen a very common recommendation is something like you can drink bone broth, you know, because it's low calories, might have a little bit of fat in it, you know, and like it might just be enough to satiate you to pull you through. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Well, so my thought there is, again, if you're using something to pull you through,
are you just being a wimp or
my argument would be like, all right, fine. So if you guys can have bone broth, I can have Jello, right? And then if I can have Jello, like I'm not gonna have Jello without like some whipped cream on it or something. And then, well, if I'm having Jello, I feel like a lot of this stuff is slippery slope. And what I have found, and outside of fasting, so let's just say nutrition in general, I have failed miserably every time I've looked for the magic in food. So every time I've tried some sort of magical way to make my fasts, you know, more effective or easier, it hasn't been useless, but it hasn't been magical. I do think that flavor is a great way to get you through. I've never actually had bone broth, so if it has a flavor
it's
very
good.
Low calories,
so good.
It might help.
Yeah. Well, and I used it on extended fast. So I've done a 3-day fast. I've done a 7-day fast. I think the 7-day fast is the longest I've ever done. But like the bone broth really got me through that. So
black coffee. Something about it is like Nestea Zero. So I don't know, for people who are into like artificially sweetened diet drinks, something about that one. Sometimes your mouth loneliness, it's just a flavor thing. I had a polyphenol drink that we actually made. It was like 5 calories per serving, which is a whack load of polyphenols, but it had that like bromelain, berry, like not a lot of flavoring to it. So you really got that whack of like, I almost want to say bittersweet of like a dried berry. And that helped a lot of people. So I think that just some flavor in your mouth helps. That's why some people go like crazy on the gum when they're fasting. But in general, again, if you can go without, go without. But if what's going to help you make it through is an almost 0 calorie flavor, that's fine. That's cool.
Just run with it. Cool.
Yeah. I don't find it very interesting because that was one of the questions I was going to have is like what actually breaks your fast, because you hear about that a lot.
Oh, all the time.
All the time. And the way I started to kind of just think about it was like, well, if my goal for this round of fasting is really just kind of like a little bit of a boost, you know, metabolically or like burning fat, whatever, like maybe I'll have bulletproof coffee, right? Like the MCT oil and butter in my coffee, which does actually like, if I'm feeling a little foggy that first day from not eating, really is a nice little boost to like help engage.
That was the original point of bulletproof coffee, right? It was a cognitive thing.
Yeah, and it does. Wow, it's incredible. But then I started thinking, like, if I really want the full benefit of this fasting experience, like if I'm going to kind of suffer through this 24 hours anyway, like at the end of the day, the broth and the bulletproof coffee, it helps a little bit, but it's still there's still some suffering going on. It's like
it's a crutch.
I'm going to go like all the way into it. Is kind of how I
feels different. Like I every once in a while will just do. I've never done a dry fast because I don't hate myself that much. But I'll do a pure water, just nothing but not even black coffee, no Nestea Zero, no gum, just water. And there's something uniquely different about how that feels at the end.
Yeah. Not to nerd out too much, and we don't have to get on this tangent, but I've always been curious about having artificial sweeteners in a fast because of something I read or heard once about just the taste of sweet signals your brain to release insulin in the bloodstream. And so actually having 0-calorie sweeteners without any calories actually simultaneously can lead to insulin resistance.
So there's I'm going to mess it up. Encephalitic. There was a response, and it's based on the anticipation of flavor.
Right. Yes.
It's, what's really cool one is like when you open a jar of peanut butter and smell it, and it's just like, your mouth starts watering.
Right.
Yeah.
So those trials are there. They do show a scientifically significant increase in insulin, which is like incredibly minute, and I don't think it affects a fast. And you just look at, okay, if we could take the volumes and volumes of trials on fasting, not necessarily intermittent fasting, but just fasting in general.
Sure.
If we were to put them, just got rid of all my binders of papers because it looked ugly and replaced it with books. But if we took all those binders, and each binder has like 100 trials in it, and let's say I've got like 13, you could easily grab 3 or 4 of them that are full of, they use artificial sweeteners during the fasting period. So they were doing measurements, whether it was growth hormone or insulin, the Grayland's trials, even the leptin ones. And these people had artificial sweeteners and there was no difference, right? So I think I'm cool with it. I think it comes down to, again, the greater good, the majoring in the major as opposed to the minor is the actual large period of time without eating. And then the minor would be like, but there was a 0.003% increase in my insulin from this minute to this minute during my fast. So I guess it was useless and I'm getting fat now, right? Like
That's good.
So I'd like to think we're got to stay majoring in the major here. And it's, were you able to go 24 hours with a very low calorie intake that was somewhat uncomfortable at times, but you pushed through. And that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah,
and then everything else is
right,
fun reading. I love it. But then the problem is I'll blog about it or I'll podcast about it. And then I'm like, am I really helping people here? Or am I just sort of giving people stuff I find fascinating? And then realizing, so I'm going to sum this up by saying, I know you've listened to me an hour, but that wasn't important, right? So I got to always remember major in the major for people.
Yeah.
No, I think it's incredible. And I'm like, I know that I'm going to end this episode and just like, still have more questions and more thinking, and it's something.
Well, and I think we're probably both going to start a fast probably sometime this next
I'm
week.
fasting right now.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, in spirit of the episode, that's great.
Yeah, pretty normally for me too. You know, and try to not eat too late, and then don't eat after 8, preferably 7, and then not eat before 11 or 12, and sometimes the whole day. You know
what the fun story on that is? So again, when I worked in the supplement industry, massive company, and we had a lot of athletes under contract. We called them athletes, fitness models, bodybuilders. And the fitness models at the time weren't eating after 6 p.m. because they were convinced that the calories they ate after 6 would be stored as fat while they were sleeping. Okay. So whether or not they were wrong, the issue is they were intermittent fasting back in 2000. If you think about it, they were stopping eating by 6. Right. They're getting up at 7. They did their fasted cardio because that was huge back then.
Yeah.
And then they ate. So it wasn't 16 hours, but it was probably 14. So we've always intuitively thought it was right. We just had different reasons to try it or not do it. But,
I think I just really encourage people, if this feels like nothing, whatever, not for me, and I have what I'm doing and it works for me, I still think mindfully giving your digestive system a 12-hour break, I think is really beneficial to digestive health. And I think that we seriously undervalue digestive
taking
health,
a break,
good digestive health, and what is going on. And I think we're leaning more towards that. And there's more and more research coming out about the second brain of the gut and how important all of the gut microbiome is, and having it in balance, and how different and unique it is to each person, and the billions of bacteria there are in your gut. You know, so it's like,
do you want something crazy cool?
Please.
Research just came out. I don't know if it was Canadian. I think it was, and they were looking at incidences of pneumonia in hospitals. So hospital-acquired pneumonia.
Okay.
So what they found was they can reduce the incidence of hospital-acquired pneumonia, so we're talking a lung issue, by having patients brush their teeth every morning. So if you think about it, when you're in the ER, you're not like brushing your teeth,
Right,
right?
right,
Like
right,
it's
right.
the last thing on your mind. But it's showing a link, most likely, between the bacteria in your mouth and
Wow.
your ability to get or not get pneummonia.
Interesting.
Whoa.
So it's not.
That's
It's
wild.
you're when we talk gut, you and I are obviously thinking like
Mm-hmm.
intestine, but all the way up, everything
Right.
counts, and it's that overused term holistic, but you really do have to look at the entire body and its environment, and how that
All plays a part.
creates health or removes health from someone.
Right, like over sanitizing your hands and completely removing every bit of bacteria continually can
Yeah.
actually weaken your immune system because you're not
Yeah,
exposed
right.
to all
Like
these other.
it's all connected, and so you do have to kind of. But I like your with your gut bacteria specifically, and probably your mouth too. Now that I'm thinking about it, like you taking a break's always a good idea, right? Like we know we have to sleep. We know that you can't just decide I'm going to bench press today all the way till Friday. Just every hour do a set at night. Like that would probably end badly, right?
A really good way
You
to
don't
get a
think
PR.
I'm going to go for a 20-minute jog as opposed to like I'm going to jog for February. Like everything we do,
Unless you're
we take
Forrest Gump.
big breaks.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
or David
Right?
Goggins maybe. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think for your digestive system, that break allows for just a rest, a relax, and a reset, which is, it's what most people want out of life. You got to think that your body wants that occasionally too.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a concept that you talked about how our bodies are very smart, right? They're smarter than we are necessarily.
Yeah,
And
incredibly smarter.
I think that also manifests just in society in general. You touched on this in your book, how almost every major religion in the world has some sort of fasting practice in it. And it's just amazing to think like they've had it figured out for thousands of years. And now we're coming back to this, and it's like just ancient wisdom that we can kind of touch on and say, okay, how can we reincorporate this back into
Well,
our
and because
lives?
we have access to food, we should eat until we go to sleep,
Constantly.
and we should eat as soon as we wake up.
Yeah.
And it's because there's just all this access
Yeah.
in modern food culture.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate the approach that you've taken with all of this information. I love how continually when we come with like really specific questions and like, well, what about this? And you're kind of like, I just hope you try it.
My
Like,
answer
do
is
it.
no
Like,
clue.
Are you going to do it? Not really no clue, but like, what's going to make you stick with it? Like, are you going to,
Yeah.
I'd rather you do it this way than not do it at all kind of thing. And I think
Yeah.
that just makes it feel very accessible and doable. And that's obviously one of our goals here on the Invigor Medical Podcast is to equip people with tools to live a healthier, fuller, longer life in general.
Right.
And
it.
so I'm really excited for our listeners. And this is really fun for me.
It was a great.
No, no.
This was great.
It was a really, really fun one. Was there anything else that you wanted to tack on?
I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, I could nerd out. Like, Natalie almost didn't make it because of the snow this morning, and so I was just like, okay, I get an hour to
There was no
myself.
way. I was like, absolutely
Brad
not.
is going to be my hostage. We're
There
gonna
we
I
go.
was
dive deep
going to
into-
be so sad if I'm like, no, I will leave 45 minutes early and be on the roads. I have four-wheel drive. It's
So
fine.
I mean,
Calling
like,
in from the car, right? Like,
I would love to dive into, and like honestly, I think we could have like a whole 20-minute segment just about autophagy and like all the actual different things that it does for your body. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe we save that for another time.
I don't know. That does sound like, I mean, I'm sure most people don't even know what you're talking about.
So you talked about autophagy or
yeah.
Autophagy?
autophagy.
Yeah.
And so
I got you going. in there.
Yeah, you did.
Well, it's like I'm potato, but like,
Yeah.
can we just dive a little bit more into that? And like, because like I know I've seen some things and read some studies about like how it can reduce cancer risk. It can do all these incredible things, and like I would imagine that it probably has things to do even with like clearing out old mitochondria from your system, which regenerates new mitochondria, activates the sirtuins, like all these really amazing things. Like I would love to hear.
Yeah. So
Dive a little bit deeper.
Can you just
into
tell
it.
people
Man.
what it is, first of all?
Yeah.
Because I think there's
Yeah.
probably a lot of people that don't have an understanding.
So
No
let
matter
me
which way you say
start
it.
with the story where I got the idea from, and we'll go from there. So it was 2000, I want to say like 13. And there was a gentleman who was like the forefront of the anti-aging, don't die stuff before that became big. And his name was Aubrey de Grey. And he was out in London, and he was hosting one of his first like anti-aging summits. And I'd gotten a hold of him like, hey, can I come out? And he was like, sure. So I flew out, and it was at Cambridge, and just a wicked area, super smart people. And he was talking about this buildup of junk in the body. He had a really good way of presenting where he was talking very scientifically, but then calling certain things junk, right? So you could kind of grasp it. And he was saying the problem with aging is an accumulation of junk in your body, and that your body has an amazing ability to recycle and reuse. So everything in your body is slowly being broken down and replaced. So the muscle you have right now in that bicep of yours there is made up of amino acids that over the last 70 days are completely new. So 72 days ago, not a single thing in that muscle is what it is now, because it's slowly been broken down, replaced, fixed. I've taken some of the protein from your food and replaced it, but then also some of the protein I released out of this shoulder, I'm going to put in this bicep. So you're constantly maintaining, because your body's way smarter than you are, a functional system so your brain can get around and go places, right? But our lifestyle, for whatever reason, started to get in the way of that process. So the constant, not just eating, but overeating, and eating possibly foods that made your insulin elevated for long periods of time. And then a sedentary lifestyle where the muscles aren't being challenged and broken down as much, starts to lead, and this is the sort of hypothesis behind it, to a situation where you're not recycling and reusing maybe as much as you should be. So those broken things, that mitochondria is not running at 100%, but it's like maybe running at 70, your body's like, yeah, good enough, you're fine, right? Yeah. But autophagy, that break from eating, and that your body going, all right, again, machine up there is not working. Not only do I need some calories, but like does anybody have some glutamine? Like I'm looking for glutamine, this one amino acid, right? And then your left biceps like, well, I've got this one piece of fiber that's kind of busted down. It's not really working well. So take the glutamine out of that, but you got to replace it and make a new one for me. Like it's just sort of trading pieces around, breaking them down into their Lego pieces and going like, this is a good piece and it fits right there. So that's kind of what autophagy is. It's your body breaking down, whether it's small organelles, whether it's small protein complexes, and then going, okay, these 3-4 pieces, these are junk. You're going kidneys and you're getting peed out. But these couple pieces, these are useful. We're going to put them over here. And that's what keeps you going. So the idea behind autophagy, which is that process, which is always going at kind of a basal level in the background. It's not like it's off, but you want to kind of allow it time to cycle up. And some people get really upset about when we're like, fasting turns on autophagy. It's more of a dial than an on-off switch, but you're trying to explain some concepts. You use analogies that sometimes don't work. But what we were saying is you want some time where you turn that dial up and you give your body a chance to go, okay, let's do some cleanup here. It's spring cleanup time. And that gets rid of these broken down proteins that might be doing their job kind of okay. But the problem is when they really start doing their job poorly, and that causes problems that people even link to cancer, right? So it's just again, you're getting out of your body's way to allow it to do what it does. And your body's incredibly good at keeping a system going for like, even on a horrible diet and no activity, but 60, 70 years, right? And then with good diet and good activity, maybe 100, that's impressive. But you have so little to do with that. And your body, the part that you aren't aware of, has so much to do with that you just want to get out of its way, let it do its house cleaning, and then let it repair what needs to be repaired and get rid of what needs to get rid of. And that's autophagy in a nutshell, just letting your body kind of do its own housekeeping every once in a while.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
That is awesome.
It's just wild to think, your body, like you said,
just all in the background, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
Incredible.
gosh. Okay, so this has been incredible. I feel like we can have a whole other episode. I know that people are really going to enjoy this. I think that it just feels like something that's so doable, and to have a better understanding of how impactful it is, not just on like, hey, I'm trying to lose weight and like, look good. There's just so much other incredible impact that this can have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. So Brad, where can people find you if they want more information?
Okay, so I am on the online world, but just Eat Stop Eat, easily grabbable off of Amazon.com.ca. We've got the audiobook, not read by me because people complained about the Canadian accent.
Oh man,
I know, I don't even hear it, but but a really good guy is reading it for me. Then there's a book and the Kindle, and then from there, if you're interested in kind of some of my random writing, it's bradpilon.com. And then other than that, there is lots of information sort of out there. Just sort of Google my name and stuff.
Are you on the socials?
I am on the socials, and all of them are as at Brad Pilon. So Instagram, Twitter, those are my main ones. I'm on TikTok. I have no idea how to use it. So Instagram and Twitter are the better spots.
Do you have a preteen or a teen? Because they can teach you how to use TikTok. That's what my daughter does.
They can manage your TikTok account for you.
Do you have 2 minutes for that story?
Yes, please.
So we went out for dinner. She's going to kill me for telling the story. But, and I'm like, hey, show me how to use Snapchat. I don't get it.
This
so
is
she's
your
like,
daughter?
well, yeah. So I'm like, okay. So I'm logging in. I'm like, there's Snap. I'm like, so like, what's this? And she's like, well, you've got your friends. And I'm like, well, who are these people right here? And she was kind of ignoring me by now. And she's like, I don't know. They're like people who like want to be your friend. I'm like, all right, I'm going to accept, right? Accept.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just accepting the friend request. She's like, you're sending friend requests. And I'm like, oh, who did I just send it to? And it was like a couple of her friends, their old babysitter, like just random people. I'm like, I'm never using this
in your
again.
contacts.
Oh my
That's
God.
what Snapchat
Yeah.
does. It's just like, here's all your
Yeah, it was-
contacts. Would you like them to be on Snapchat too? Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was horrible. It was, and then I'm looking through it when she finally explained it to me, and I'm like, oh, there's a friend, and she's like, no, that's their kid using their
phone number.
So I'm like, is there no one that I know on this? I'm like, I'm just gonna. No, I'm off. I'm done. So yeah. So I'm gonna stick with the ones I know how to use.
Yes.
I'll slowly figure out TikTok, but Instagram is simple. You take a picture, you talk to it, and you post it, right? And Twitter is like,
sure.
I had a thought, so I can do those.
And
Yeah.
I'm happy to see TikToks way too late on Instagram. I'm just like, can't keep. I'll watch
2 weeks
TikTok
later.
when people send it to me, but I can't just like get stuck in the never ending.
Exactly.
I do that enough on Instagram. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Well, this is incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time to
Thank
come
you
on
for
with
joining
us.
us.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks for having me. It's been tons of fun.
Yeah, we'd love to have you again. We don't mind your Canadian accent at all.
Not at all. I don't know what they're talking about.
I don't know either. I don't know what they're talking about.
Well played. That was good.
Wow,
very
you're
good.
great. You had the jokes today too. I'm gonna remember that other joke. But anyway, thanks again. We'll have you on soon.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Invigor Medical Podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, you can support us by liking and subscribing.
Your feedback matters, so feel free to share questions or future episode ideas in the comment section.
For more information about our prescription strength treatments for weight loss, ED, and overall wellness, all from qualified doctors and reputable pharmacies, visit us at invigormedical.com. And don't forget to use code podcast10 for a 10% discount on your first treatment plan. Until next time, stay well.